Winter this year was snowy in the state of Illinois. The wind moaned in the winter darkness, howling through the cracks of the windows of the old morgue in a small town on the edge of the state. Gray twilight thickened beyond the glass as Gregory Hanks, a 46-year-old security guard, took a deep drag of his cigarette, watching the distant streetlights. He didn't like weekend shifts. On those days, the morgue was empty, and he was left alone with the dead. Although, as he often said, at least the dead remained silent. Gregory's stern face was rarely seen with a smile. It bore the marks of a life spent in Chicago's criminal neighborhoods, from which he had moved here. He had long since learned to appreciate silence. Solitude was his choice. In the past, he had served time in prison for a robbery that ended in death. It was his greatest and most terrible mistake. And although he had atoned for his crime with years behind bars, the same image returned to him every night. In his dreams, the eyes of the innocent woman he had killed, her gaze frozen in eternity. But tonight, he would not be left alone with his ghosts. 2 police officers appeared at the morgue's doorstep, their faces tense. "We found her this morning," one of them said, nodding toward a black body bag containing the corpse of a young girl. Hank stepped closer and looked at it. She was perfectly pale, like a marble statue, her long black hair cascading over her white shoulders. She wore an old-fashioned white dress with a lace collar. She looked as though she was about to wake up. Death had not touched her delicate beauty. Her face, with its peaceful expression, seemed as though if one were to touch her, she would open her eyes. "Where was she found?" Hanks asked, removing the cigarette from his lips. "In the middle of a field, near an old farmhouse, 3 kilometers from the road. She was lying on her back, as if she had simply been placed there. No signs of violent death. But the strangest part, there were no footprints around her. Neither hers nor anyone else's. No marks on the snow. Barefoot in this weather. How did she get there? Damn if we know." "What's that in her hands?" Hanks noticed a small black book, bound in leather, resting in the girl's cold fingers. One of the officers carefully took it and opened it. The pages were blank. "The title is in Latin, but in said anything. Not a single word." "And the coroner won't be here until Monday?" Hanks asked, though he already knew the answer. No one worked on weekends. He felt an inexplicable chill creep down his spine. "That's right, you're in charge, Hanks. Make sure nothing happens." When they left, silence filled the morgue. Only the clock on the wall counted the seconds, and somewhere deep in the ventilation shafts, the wind whispered. Hanks looked at the girl once more. Something about her felt wrong, as if she wasn't just dead, as if she were sleeping. Midnight came. First, the corridor lights began to dim, as if the darkness was swallowing the bulbs. Then the locker room door, which had been closed, slowly creaked open, as if pushed by an unseen hand. In the deep silence, Hanks heard a sound of faint rustling, like fabric sliding over metal. He turned to the table where the body lay. The sheet covering her face had shifted. His fingers clenched his cigarette so tightly it nearly snapped. He took a slow step forward and carefully replaced the sheet. But the moment he did, cold fingers beneath the fabric grasped his wrist. Hanks jolted awake at his post, drenched in sweat. His heart pounded wildly, a dull roar in his ears. He breathed heavily. There was no way he was sleeping again. But what happened next made him question reality itself. The darkness slithered along the walls, and the wind battered the windows as if trying to break in. Hanks began to hear footsteps in the corridor Chevy, slow, as if someone was moving barefoot. When he went to check, the corridors met him with emptiness. Someone knocked on the door 3 times during the night, steady and insistent. But each time he opened it, no one was there, only the cold darkness staring back at him. He felt watched. Invisible, sticky eyes followed his every move, sending shivers down his spine. In his 2 years as a morgue security guard, this was the first time he had felt afraid. The midnight gloom thickened over the morgue like a dense veil. Sitting at his post, he glanced at the clock when, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a silhouette, motionless, dark, lingering at the edge of his vision. He turned sharply, but there was nothing. His hands clenched into fists. Something was wrong. He stood up and cautiously moved toward the room where the bodies were stored. The cold metal doors were covered in frost, and the air was thick with a heavy, stale silence. The girl's body was gone. Then, from all the storage units at once, a knocking echo, a dull, desperate, rhythmic, as if dozens of hands were beating against the metal from the inside. Hanks recoiled, his breath turning shallow. He ran toward the phone at his post. Sprinting through the corridor, the lights flickered chaotically in every fixture. Hanks grabbed the receiver in panic, but instead of a dial tone, he heard a long, chilling female laugh. Terrified, he threw the phone off the desk. Everything suddenly stopped. The lights were normal, and the morgue returned to its usual eerie silence. Hanks looked around. On the floor near his feet lay the girl's black book. At some point, it had opened by itself, the blank pages flipping rapidly until they settled on one, where inked letters spelled out his name and the word murderer. Horror tightened around his throat. He rushed to the exit, but the doors wouldn't open. The key spun uselessly in the lock. He remembered the emergency exit in the basement. Hanks knew he couldn't stay here. He ran down the stairs into the basement. Cold, damp darkness pressed in on the space. His breathing echoed through the narrow corridor. He was almost at the door. He could see the light from outside. The police found him in the morning. He was hanging from the ceiling. Suicide, one officer concluded. Strange, another noted. There's a lock of long black hair in his hand. Definitely suicide. The doors were locked from the inside. Case closed. Coffee? The first one suggested. And the officers left the basement, where Hanks remained frozen in eternal darkness.